welcome to our webinar on Know Your Interested Parties. As we go through the webinar and you have any questions, please drop them in the conversation box and we'll answer them as many as possible at the end. Thanks. So before we start, a little bit about us. Who are we? We're CertiKit, a leading creator of compliance toolkits and provide ISO services, and we're based in Derbyshire in the UK. Since 2011, we've helped more than 4,000 customers globally achieve compliance. We specialise in ISO standards and data protection compliance. Our mission is to make compliance easy so that more organisations can achieve certifications to and benefit from their chosen standard or their data protection regulations. And our ISO consultancy and internal auditing services available remotely. We do it via Teams to companies across the UK and the EU. If you want to find out more about us, you can visit our website at www.certikit.com. A bit about myself. I'm Ted Spiller. I'm one of the compliance consultants. I'm a consultant for the ISO 9000, 14000, 45 and 22301 management systems. My job is to assist new and current customers with their toolkits and implementation. I'm also the technical author assisting with the development of toolkits. And I'm a certified 9000, 14000, 45000 and 22301 lead auditor with about 20 odd years of experience. And for my sins, I'm a black belt Lean Six Sigma practitioner. And my colleague, over to you.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Jerry Lawrence. I'm CertiKit's ISO 27001 consultant. My role is predominantly involved with internal audit consultancy to 27001 information security management system for new and current CertiKit customers. I also provide guidance to customers who are implementing information security management systems or even integrated management systems with 27001 toolkit. I'm a certified 27001 lead implementer and qualified 27001 lead auditor, as well as ISO 9001 lead auditor as well. I've got a variety of experience over the last 25 years, mainly as quality manager, and I've held information security manager roles within my past organisations. I've got a sort of a variety of experience in defence software, medical devices, and just general quality management. Thanks, Ted.
Okay, quick look at what we're going to be covering today. We're going to go through why we need to identify our interested parties and who they are. We're going to see how we classify interested parties. We're going to give you some examples of interested parties and talk about the tiers of interested parties, first, second and third, and maybe more tier interested parties. And then we'll give you examples of the needs and expectations and examples of actions to address those needs and expectations. So let's dive straight back into this now. So why do we need to identify our interested parties? Well, in most of the management systems that we're looking at, 9, 14, 45, 27001, 23301, and several others, within clause 4.2 and 6.1 of the standard, and these are all written within the Annex SL format, you'll find a requirement for needs and expectations of interested parties in clause 4, and that's closely linked to actions to address risk and opportunities in 6.1. These are the two areas that we need to find aligned, and they've got to be aligned. One of the things I've seen in the past when I've been doing auditing is that they don't align them. They found interested parties, they've identified the needs, expectations, but they don't align it with how they're going to address the risks and possible opportunities from those needs and requirements. So these are very closely linked. You've got to remember that. But we need to understand what is the difference between a need and expectation. So an expectation are hopes and beliefs that are focused on the expected inputs and outputs of an organisation that could have an impact upon the organisation. So these are direct impacts to your organisation. That's what an expectation is. And a need is something that is necessary for compliance or regulatory or statutory requirements. fulfilling the requirement of a contract that could have an impact upon your organisations. These are mandatory requirements. There's a need for you to be compliant to ISO standard, to be compliant with the Environmental Protection Act if you're 14,001, to be compliant with the contract you have with a supplier or a customer. So those are the two differences between them. The importance of a stakeholder management to success of an organisation can't be underestimated. It's far more than just customer focused. It's about actively understanding the needs and expectations and managing either the positive, the negative, or the changing influence from a range of stakeholders. It's an ongoing thing. This is something that needs to be reviewed on a constant basis to make sure that you're fully aware of what's happening. The use of stakeholders is fine. ISO understand that you can use interested parties if you want, or stakeholders. In fact, ISO 9000, which is the vocabulary document for the 9000 family, states that organizations attract, capture and retain the support of relevant interested parties they depend upon for their success. But you can read that organizations attract, capture and retain the support of their relevant stakeholders they depend upon for their success. So you can actually intermingle these, they're synonymous with each other. The requirement to understand the needs and expectations of interested parties expressed almost identically in all of the standards that we're talking about. It states the organisation shall, and when it says shall, that means that you must determine the interested parties that are relevant to the management system. And these are the ones, as we just said, have a direct influence, whether it's positive, negative, or maybe a change in influence to you. The requirements, needs and expectations of those interested parties that are relevant to the management system. The effect that they have upon your ISO management system. You've got to be able to identify that. So who are these interested parties? Well, interested parties are either a person or a group or an organisation that has an interest or a concern in an organisation, your organisation. But to put it another way, is it's anyone or an organisation that can affect your organisation's output, has a requirement that has to be met by your organisation, or can be affected by decisions or changes within your organisation. They could also be perceived to be affected by your organisation. And when I say perceived, if we think about the environmental management system, people outside of the company, outside of the actual organisation, outside of your office or your factory or whatever it is, could be perceived to be affected by your activities. You normally get these, as we'll see later on, through social media or complaints or things like that, action groups. And they could also be within your organisation. So it's not just external. You have interested parties inside, your employees, your owners, your management, your people that work inside the organisation. A simple list of interested parties won't be sufficient to meet the requirements of standard. This is because a simple list doesn't allow you to understand the needs and expectations. And as you'll see later on in the presentation, when Jerry goes through the way that we documents in a table, how we document our interested parties in a table, will show you that you have to think things through and document them. But there are things that you need to think about when you start to think about classifying your interested parties. So one of them is influence. Can what the interested party does or think influence an organization's decision making? Do they influence the industry overall? So they might not have a direct impact upon you, but maybe an impact upon the industry you're working for. Therefore, you have to keep an eye on that. So they are interested parties. Risk. How much risk does an interested party create for your organization? Or conversely, you for them. This is a two-way avenue. Do you create risk for a supplier? You're their main customer, and if you decide you're not going to do it, is there a major risk to them? Well, obviously there is, because they're going to lose a big chunk of their money. But conversely, if they are a supplier of something specific for your organization that you need, and they can't provide that, there's a big risk to your organization. Opportunity. Does the interested party provide or create opportunities for your organization? Now, this is, could they open doors for you? Is there a chance that there's a new area of the industry or a new part of the industry that's going to be open to you? There's an opportunity there. And again, it does ask you to look at the needs and expectations, the risk and opportunities of your interested parties. And you need to identify your opportunities so you can exploit them. The proximity, how close is the interested party to you? Now, that's not how close are they by regulations of that. This is how close in proximity to your facility, your offices. And as I stated earlier, 14,001 environmental, even health and safety, 45,001, could have effect on the people around you. The house and estate beside your garage area or whatever. So you've got to think about proximity as well. Dependency, excuse me, this is quite an important one. How much do you rely on the interested party? And again, this is two ways. How much do they rely on you? So as I stated before with the risk, if you were to stop using them, is there going to be a major impact upon them? But if they stop being able to supply you what you require to produce your goods or your services, is there a major impact or even any impact upon you? Impact, what impact does the interested party have on your organization? If they stop associating with you, what will happen? Supposing you're in a contract where 2 or 3 of you are working together to supply a manufactured goods or a service, and one of them decides they're not going to work with you anymore, the impact upon that. Responsibility, how much responsibility do you have to the interested party? Obviously, for regulatory statutory requirements, there's a big responsibility there. If you're ISO certified, there's a responsibility there to be compliant. But if your organization ceases to exist, is there a responsibility to somebody else outside there, another interested party who could suffer? I know they would make you their interested party, but this is a two-way street. You've got to think of the consequences that way. And then finally, authority. How much control or say over your organization does the interested party have? Are they responsible for enforcing rules or making sure you follow regulations? There's a couple that come to mind, the Environmental Act, the Treatment of Waste Act, there's Health and Safety Act. All of these require you to be compliant and complicit with their regulations. So this is important to think about as stakeholders. Each management system defines an interested party as a person or organization that can affect or be affected by or perceived itself to be affected by a decision or an activity. The standard have similar definitions of these across each one. So we're going to just have a quick look at how they've changed the wording slightly to fit the requirement of each standard. So for example, 9001 states that interested parties are not just customers. Interested parties also include those who pose a significant risk to organizational sustainability if their needs and expectations are not met. 14,001 clarifies that to perceive itself to be affected means the perception has been made known to the organization, such as through feedback or comments via organizational social media channels or complaints even. 27,001 adds the note, the requirements of interested parties may include legal and regulatory requirements and contractual obligations. A lot different to what 9,000 has. 45,001 outlines requirements concerning workers who are interested parties. Now 45,000 being occupational health and safety centers around your workforce. So obviously the workers, your employees, are going to be central, and 45,001 emphasizes this. And then finally for 22301, adds impacted communities and local populations are considered to be interested parties, and a decision maker can be an interested party. That decision maker could be inside the organization or outside the organization. So you can see each of the main standards that we've been talking about have a unique perspective on part of your interested parties. And an auditor will be expecting you to be able to show that you've considered this before you go for certification.
The interested parties, as Ted alluded to earlier, was sort of split mainly into two areas. You've got internal interested parties and external parties. Internally, your staff, as shown in the example here, your sort of typical internal people with things like employees, managers, and maybe owners of the business. The majority of stakeholders, though, are more likely to be external stakeholders, and they would be made up from people like customers, various suppliers, distributors, i.e. the suppliers of suppliers, service users, shareholders, investors, banks, and social networks, etc. So if you have a look at what each of the standards said earlier about a definition of the interested parties, the main standards each give some examples and some context. I suppose the starter for 10. I mean, these are very, very good suggestions and will probably be common for many of the standards. However, you should never just trust this list. You should always look at what the nature of your business is, what it is they're providing, and who are all the stakeholders that have some needs and expectations from you. But just to have a look at some of the examples on this slide is that 9001, for example, the main ones are things like customers, employees, owners, regulators, etc. And in common, 14,001 also talks about customers and employees. But it now, because it's in concern with environmental factors, it starts to bring in some other stakeholders, such as the wider communities, NGOs, and possibly, more in terms of the regulators and government bodies that are involved. When you move over to 27,001, that uses the term clients. Essentially, though, you can consider the definition of and the use of clients in 27,001 to be essentially the same as the other standards with customers. They're the people that you rely on or have influence over your management system. And then in common with many of the others, you've got things like suppliers and contractors. And in particular with 27,001, there is that additional definition where legal and regulatory bodies is specifically brought out. When you move into 45,001, that's more focused around obviously the health and safety aspects. So the stakeholders change slightly. Obviously with health and safety predominantly involves the workers, and imagine you'll be looking at which workers are at most risk, if you like, from situations within the workplace that are liable to expose and add risk to health and safety. Obviously executive management, ultimately executive management are responsible for, ultimately accountable for health and safety within the business. And then you've got other interested people like managers, unions, suppliers, and contractors as well. So they're just what the standards give you as a starter for 10. And as I say, don't just rely on that list, although it will fit most circumstances. You know, always look very carefully about who are the people that have some vested interest in your organisation and the management system itself. Okay.
Okay, let's have a look at tiers of interested parties. I look at interested parties as tiers. Your first tier are the ones that are really close to you, that have a major impact upon you. Your second tier are the ones that can influence your first tier and influence you, and your third tier are the ones that can influence your second tier and your first tier and then you. So let's have a look at the different ones. So a tier 1, we'd be looking at customers, shareholders, staff, regulatory bodies, direct suppliers, etc. These are your tier 1s. These can affect you and your management system directly. Your tier 2 would be interested parties that have an indirect impact upon your organization, and these tend to be external to your organization, would include your supplier's supplier, your supplier's distributors, and maybe other countries' regulatory bodies, etc., etc. So they have an impact. So if your supplier runs out of stuff to supply your supplier, who then is supposed to supply you, there's an impact to him and then an impact to you. If you're 14,001, your supplier's distribution network to the supplier might be by truck, therefore there's a carbon problem. And then your supplier may then send it to you by truck, there's another carbon. So you've got impacts there as well. And then your third tier, these are external again, could be your competitors within the marketplace. What are they doing differently that could have an impact upon you? What have they discovered that you haven't, that you need to think about? For food manufacturers, etc., ethical farming. For furniture manufacturers, maybe sustainable forest. And talking about food providers, your food provider, the one before he goes to the supermarket with you buy it, their chain of tiers can go back half a dozen, because they have to be able to work out from which farm on which day was that produce, the original produce, harvested, and then work the way through the chain from the farm to the processing center to the distribution center, maybe to somewhere else, and then to you. They have to be able to look at all of those as their interested parties, even though they're that far extended. So interested parties can have a major impact further down the line. So you've got to think about that as well. Jerry.
Okay. Yeah. In the next 4 slides, they'll be provided within the slide pack, so we won't go through every single example on these. But what we'll do is sort of just walk through a little bit about how we provide documents and forms within our toolkits to help you sort of build up what information it is you require and what are the requirements of our interested parties. So we'll just walk through a couple of examples with that from each of these. However, as I say, you can actually make your own format up to collate this information together, but as I say, we do provide a document in the toolkit for this. So if we take a look at some of the internal factors then and who the interested parties are, I'll just pick a couple of examples. So first one, let's just go with the first one on management. So the requirement that we've got from our internal management or a requirement summary is that there's a lack of internal support from senior staff. So what action do we need to take on that? One of the ways would be to maybe establish one-to-one meetings with managers to sort of provide them with sort of coaching and mentoring on the management system and requirements that are part of the whole management system that they need to be aware of. And who would be responsible for that? We would probably say the HR would track and coordinate those coaching and mentoring sessions, and the CEO would ultimately be responsible for making sure that the management within the business are suitably trained and aware of requirements that they need to be aware of. Let's just pick another one. Procurement. Most companies have suppliers in one shape or form. In this particular example, we've identified that the product range that we're currently making has some sustainable materials, but the supplier only has limited supply of these. So ultimately, that might result in us needing to look at alternatives and possibly do a product redesign. So the action we need to take there is to obviously investigate the other sources of materials that are sustainable, and then once we've identified that, carry out a cost and product comparison to see what effect that's going to have on our final product costs. Who'd be responsible for looking at that? That would be someone like the procurement manager, and someone like his boss, the chief operating officer, or whoever his boss is, would be monitoring to make sure that those actions are taken. So next slide. Here's some examples of external interested parties. If you take a customer example here, the customer in this case wants to ensure that their design data is safe, that any information that's given to you or between your organization and theirs is not compromised. So the action we take is demonstrate to customer that the company is compliant to the relevant legal and standard requirements. So we would identify what are those legal and standard requirements as well as the customer requirements. And it may simply be in this case that the company decides to look at a management system standard such as 27001. And the responsible person will be someone like the InfoSec manager, and the CEO will be the monitoring authority to make sure that those actions are completed. Similarly, we'll look at the regulators, for example. Their main interest is that the company conforms to applicable requirements. So how can we do that? We'll carry out internal audits against those regulatory requirements on a periodic basis or every 3 months, however long you decide. Quality manager would be responsible for that, and the COO would be monitoring that is happening. So now, similar with internal and external parties, we'll now look at sort of how we can work out what the risks and opportunities are of the factors and things that the requirements that the interested party is flowing down to us. So if we look at the same example, management, where we've got the lack of internal support from senior staff, then looking at that same issue in a different way, what are the risks? So the risks are potentially that if employees don't see the managers being very supportive of the work they're doing, or you know, the processes and things that they're being expected to work to, then that might lead to employees leaving. Loss of experienced workers. It may contribute to an increase in poor quality output. However, there is an opportunity here in that by increasing the confidence of middle managers, that will hopefully boost morale in the business. So I think the moral of the tale is that obviously if they get the right support and training, their increased confidence and morale will then generally contribute towards employees not leaving, and hopefully would also contribute to the quality output. And the effective effectiveness of that action will be we retain experienced workers and maintain high quality product outputs, develop middle managers for senior positions and promote from within. So that's given a little bit of career development. If we look at the procurement example, the sustainable material one again, the risk there is the possibility of running out of the required materials, which would again impact on the quality of the product, particularly if they find alternatives that we've not approved or are happy with. But the opportunity here is to ensure a good supply and increase of environmental standing in the marketplace. So by making sure that we are using sustainable materials and that it functionally works towards the product and what it's trying to achieve, the quality product, then hopefully that will improve our product standing. The benefits and effectiveness with this one is that we would increase our environmental market presence. It's good for PR and media and product catalogues and saying how good we are for sustainability. And it could potentially help towards becoming a market leader in the sector. So for external factors, looking at the customer design data issue again, so ensuring that design data is safe. What are the risks here if we don't maintain good control over customers' design data? Well, we might get penalties or fines. We'd probably get loss of reputation from the customer that we were working with, and potentially it would impact on future business. The opportunities here, though, is that we would increase potentially business due to referrals if we do the job, do things right. We do control design data. We're working towards ISO standards, like information security or whatever. Then that is obviously going to have a positive impact, and it would certainly improve our standing in tender responses. Many a time customers get asked, are you ISO approved, and it gives customers some confidence that you have at least control over certain processes and things that go on within the business. So the effectiveness of that generally is then you would have hopefully more happy customers. It could potentially generate more sales and better control over the internal and customer data that is being controlled within the business. So if we look at the supply one again,
regulators.
Oh, sorry, regulators. Yeah, the company is to conform to the applicable requirements. So the risks here is we'd definitely get fines for non-compliance and breaching regulations. That has huge potential then and risk to loss of business and reputation. And in some cases, we've often heard stories where businesses who, definitely breach health and safety regulations, etc., are potentially up for closure of the business. The opportunities, though, if we get it right, we do things right, is that we can go for more tenders, and we're in a good position when we're going for tenders, and there's a good potential for renewing existing contracts. And the benefits overall and the effectiveness is that we remain in business, we remain competitive, we retain our current contracts, and people won't go to seek to look to put their business elsewhere, and then hopefully gain new contracts and bring new clients on board. So, okay.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay, so let's summarize what we've looked at over this brief webinar. Your interested party is an extremely important part of your management system. So take your time in identifying them and their needs and their expectations. It's really important that you fully understand. It's really important to fully understand what the consequences could be if you do not fulfill those needs and expectations. Is it going to be a fine? Is it going to be a risk to business, etc.? You must identify ways of ensuring that you meet those needs and expectations. You must have something in place to make sure that you comply with their requirements. And if there are opportunities arising for them, have something in place where you could exploit those opportunities. And these must be monitored on a regular basis. It's a live document. And then you must review the list of interested parties on a regular basis just to ensure that they're still interested parties, that the actions you've taken are still plausible and they're still suitable for what they are, and that the outputs are still the same. So, how else can CertiKit help you? Well, we provide a raft of toolkits that cover most of the major ISO standards, also some data protection like GDPR. We've got toolkits in there, and the toolkits are full of useful documents that are all able to be tailored to your individual organization. Within the documents, there's a holding area for your logo, so we actually have a logo replacement service where we can replace all the logos on all of the documents. Every toolkit has 30 or 40 documents in it, and it's time consuming to go through each one. We can actually do that really quickly for you and get that toolkit back to you with your logo and your company name already throughout all the documents. We provide ISO consultancy through our toolkits. Which are designed to help you. We can come in and help you with the documentation within our toolkit, help you decide what documents you need, what documents you don't need, etc. We also do ad hoc consultancy payable on an hourly basis, where you can just talk to us about different things, different needs, different requirements. If you're having a problem with one of the toolkits, we can help you out that way. And finally, ISO internal auditing. We do provide a service where we can come in and audit your system. We can do this as pre-certification audits prior to you going through for certification, or we can come in after you've been certified as second-party auditors to audit your system for you if you don't have internal auditors. Well, we hope you found the webinar informative. Just remember that no two lists of interested parties are alike, as every business or organisation is slightly different, and therefore so are their interested parties, and some will affect others more than others. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to you on Monday. If you have any questions, be happy to answer it now. Did we have any questions, Jerry?
Yeah, we had one which said that are regulators classed as external parties?
Yes, of course they are, because they don't actually live within your company. They're an external organisation, maybe a government department, that write regulations that will dictate to you what you have to do to remain compliant. So they have to be an external interested party.
And another question is it important when you're actually just collating the list of interested parties to distinguish internal and external, or just list them as an interested party?
It makes it easier when you review interested parties if you identify your internal interested parties against your external interested parties. Your internal interested parties you're going to actually interact with on a much more greater basis, so you have a lot more control and you'll have a lot more awareness. However, your external interested parties are going to be a lot greater. You've got like suppliers, regulatory bodies, legal bodies, customers, etc., etc. They are all going to have differing requirements, so it's a lot easier if you have the two lists. You could actually have it on the same table but separate them out as internal or external to review them on a regular basis that way.
And another one, if you've got a whole list of interested parties and ultimately one or maybe two out of all of that list, you end up sort of scoring on and finding that they don't really have much influence compared to other ones. Do you remove them or do you leave them in?
As we said about classifying, you need to decide the impact, and it's something like Jerry likes to talk about, is your risk appetite. You know, are these going to have a major impact? Are they regulatory and statutory? If they are, you have to keep them in. But if it's something like your supplier's supplier, does that have a major impact? Probably not. However, you would maybe look at that and do a risk assessment and say, yeah, they could have a major impact. If it's a wood from South America and it's got to be transported across the ocean, is that transportation a risk? So you've got to look at how it's going to affect you as a risk.
Yeah, I think the question was also biased towards if you've actually established that that stakeholder is of relatively low importance or not much impact after doing all of that, do you still keep them in your interested parties list or do you remove it?
No, I think you would keep
the point.
Okay, I think you would keep it in until such point as they drop off the list. The one thing you don't want is a huge list where you've got interested parties from 3 or 4 years ago that you've already identified. You've got things in place that you're really happy with what's in place. Do you need to keep that on there? Probably not.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us at this webinar. Again, if you have any questions or anything, just drop us an email through the CertiKit website and we'll get back to you. In the meantime, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.